Boom. Aloha, everybody. Good morning. Good morning. Happy Hump Day Wednesday. Thank you for joining the show. We got a good show tonight, guys. Dr. Tim Brown, Dr. Lee Altenberg. Going over the numbers today. Uh, 13 more deaths, guys. Almost two a day. And no, nothing from our state except the media reports that our numbers are coming down. Never mind that the deaths are staying the same. And two a day. I don't know. I don't know how that's acceptable. But anyway, appreciate you guys joining us tonight again. I'm sure we'll learn a bunch tonight. Um, Positivity rates, as I'm sure if you follow Facebook, you've seen. I think it's Hawaii COVID 808 posts up the ridiculous positivity rates in some of the zip codes on Oahu. 60, 70, 80% positivity rate. But if you listen to the state again, the media, they'll tell you that it's 10% or whatever. I guess this whole reporting thing, I focus on the deaths. I know people will say that's not a good metric. Well, for me, it is the good metric. It's the only metric because testing is down, reporting is skewed. So why rely on inaccurate numbers, right? So yeah, KHON took down their corona information. I just saw a post yesterday from the Department of Health that they're not going to be focusing. They're going to just compile the COVID information right in with their weekly DOH newsletter. So for all intents and purposes, in our state, as far as our leaders are concerned, our governor, our lieutenant governor, our Department of Health, our Department of Education, for all intents and purposes, COVID is done. Uh, and we know that's not true. The variant report now clearly shows, and the data is old, a couple weeks old, clearly shows that the BA5 variant is the dominating strain. I think the last report had it at 83%. But we know that it's probably 100% because the data is old. I still, for the life of me, cannot understand why the state cannot produce timely reports like all the other states do. But it was their plan from the beginning. It was amazing how during the last election, the campaign, COVID was a non-issue. Non-issue. I watched the news tonight, and they were talking about the sports complex on Oahu that they want to spend, 350, $400 million, and how they can attract all these international visitors. You remember when they told us they were going to manage tourism? No, man. Now it's all grab them all. Let's just flood our islands with visitors so we can get their money. It's just a bunch of lies, and it's frustrating. I mean, we just came to an election where people had an opportunity to make some changes, and the people spoke. The minority of the people spoke, and we see no change, very little change, statewide. So my word to them is enjoy it because we never step up. 40%. It was even less on Kauai, but statewide 40% voter turnout. We expect we get what we deserve. If we're not willing to step up and vote, if we're not willing to step up and educate our friends and relatives about what we know, then we get what we deserve, and we'll have another 4 years of the same if we don't make some changes in how we vote. So that's my rant because I'm frustrated. We're headed to a repeat in our state, and I'm not satisfied. It's not acceptable. Again, when you get 13 deaths, and remember early on in the pandemic, the governor would come on and talk about it and offer nothing, zero, nothing, just nothing. In fact, it's at the end of the report, right? They talk about how wonderful because our COVID numbers are coming down and blah blah blah, and then they squeeze in at the end, and there were 13 deaths reported last week. Like it's nothing, 13 deaths, like it was nothing. Unbelievable. So I mean, again, we get what we deserve, folks. and it's up to us to make the change. It really is. And very disappointed with the way the primary elections turned out. So we got to keep the fight, guys. We just got to keep on going and keep on going hard. So I know doctors will be on shortly. I'm gonna ask for all of your indulgence. I'm gonna, for about 5 minutes, I guess. I'm gonna read a couple of stories, a couple of information that was provided to me today from friends, villagers, and I'm gonna read what they had to say. And in fact, one's quite appalling. And I'm gonna wait till both doctors are on. Dr. Altenberg is in. How you doing, Doc?
All right.
Oh, nice and clear, nice and clear.
Good.
I love it when the system works. So, yeah, 71 COVID deaths in the past 4 weeks. Now, come on, guys. Is that acceptable? 71 people lost their lives, families lost their loved ones. 71 in the last 4 weeks. I don't see how that can be acceptable. I don't see how that wouldn't trigger some, at least, discussion by our state leadership on maybe looking at some new safety protocols. I don't know, Doc. What's your thought, man? What's your thought? Welcome to the show, by the way. Welcome
All right.
to the show.
Thank you, Mel, for having me. So I didn't think I was going to be on till 7:00. So my mind is a blank. My mind is a blank.
Okay,
for
well,
2 more minutes.
Okay, good. That'll be good. Enjoy. How you doing, Tim Brown? Dr. Brown.
Doing okay.
Oh, loud and clear. Music to my ears. I was going to ask you guys to indulge me in reading a couple of basically stories just information that I received from good friends and villagers as well. Before we get into the discussion of tonight's topic, which are the numbers. But I did want to, so please kick back and relax. And I'm going to read it as quick as I can, but I'm going to read it because I don't want to take anything out of context. I'm not going to mention any names or reference any schools, but I am going to read to you. And I have my water. I had my stent removed yesterday from at Queens, and the doctor gave me strict orders: 1 cup of coffee a day. So I have this 5-gallon bucket that looks like a coffee cup. That's going to be my 1 cup. Anyway, so let me just read this. This is from a good friend of mine here on Kauai, and this is involving one of our schools here. So basically, says our school administration, and I suspect many others, is oriented as follows. Number 1, kids need to be in school, and the school needs to be open. Number 2, masking is not required. And in this one school, under 3% of the students and staff are now masked. Number 3, ventilation is not required. Number 4, testing is not required. Number 5, air monitoring is not required. CO2 levels are not required to be below any minimums. And staff training is not required. So there is, in fact, nothing to comply with other than being open, and therefore they are in compliance with the DOE guidelines. And this was his test case. His entire family PCR tested Monday, the day before school, being responsible parents. On Tuesday, the first day, 2 homeroom teachers were given plug-and-play CO2 monitors, which were ignored and not plugged in. All windows in the classrooms were closed and the AC was turned on. One of our kids caught COVID on the first or second day, positive antigen and PCR on the morning of day 4. Teacher plugged in the CO2 monitor and is trying to keep it in the green under around 1200 with no guidance or understanding that 600 to 800 is a better target. And the teacher brought in her own air purifier that will clean 400 square feet. And I'll read the letter from the school that he received on August 8th. The Hawaii State DOE considers the health and well-being of our students and staff a priority. No. With that in mind, we are sending this letter home for your awareness. We have been alerted that an individual at this school has been diagnosed with or has symptoms consistent with COVID-19. Your child may have been potentially exposed to this individual on August 5th. To protect medical privacy, we cannot share additional information. In alignment with the Hawaii State Department of Health summary guidance for K-12 schools, individuals with in-school exposure may remain in school and work if asymptomatic and should If symptoms develop, immediately self-isolate and get tested. Get tested at least 5 days after potential exposure, even if not having symptoms, and wear a well-fitting mask around others indoors for 10 days. Now we now know that the lifting of the quarantine now applies to off-campus exposure as well, and blah blah blah. That's the first one. Now this one here is from today. So imagine this, folks. All of you that have children in school, you're at work and you get a text from your child, and your child is telling you during class, "Mom or Dad, my teacher is sick. He's coughing. He said he's sick, and I'm afraid." So the parent calls the school. The school this is on Oahu. Again, I'm not going to reveal the school. The school tells her they can't approach the teacher and ask, and that and the teacher in question did not have a positive COVID result confirmation. So if the parent feels uncomfortable, then she should go pick her kid up, which is actually what happened. This mom went to the school and picked the kid up. They also said since the rules changed, all they can do is try to make sure that the child wears their masks. They told the mom that they're short staffed. And of course, the mom said, "That's not our responsibility or my problem. It's your guys' problem to fill the spots for sick staff. That's the DOE's job." She contacted DOH. Department of Health said, "DOE has their own guidelines. All we can tell you is to have your kids wear a mask and get vaccinated and boosted." They didn't even think to go investigate a teacher that went to school sick. It's the DOE's deal. The teacher openly told the kids that he was sick and to stay away from him, keep their distance. This mom's daughter raised her hand and asked the teacher, "Why are you at work?" And he said, "We don't have coverage, and that is why I told you folks to stay away from me." This mom went further and contacted the teacher personally, and the teacher um, actually told her, "Thank you for calling the front office." He said that he wears his mask everywhere he goes. However, he was told he cannot force the kids to put on a mask. He also said that they didn't have coverage, and that this was a senior class. This was their last year, and he needed them to learn. Quote, he said, "I'm sorry if I came in. I'm sorry that I came into work, but I won't come in tomorrow." This mom told him to go get a test and try to get some treatment. The daughter did sit at the entrance of the class. There's a box of masks, but no one wears them. So that happened today at a school on Oahu, and I guess why I bring that up, and I asked permission to share that story because I think it's important that the parents know this is what's happening in our schools, folks. We have teachers coming to work sick because they feel obligated because there's no coverage, there's no substitutes or whatever. That's irrelevant to me, right? If you're sick, you stay home. That's the DOE worry about. I think our main function should be keeping our kids safe and other teachers and staff. So I wanted to start off with that two stories just so that we get an understanding that, as the first person said, it's pretty much open, wide open. There are no guidelines. We are at a moment now where BA5 has definitely taken over, but the state continues to paint the picture that it is absolutely safe, and that is a sad, sad state of affairs for our state. So, with that, who wants to go first? I'd love to hear your comments on that. Whichever one, whoever wants to.
Let me start off. Number one, a sick teacher in a classroom is a violation of their own guidelines. Their own guidelines are quite clear that anybody who is symptomatic does not belong in the school. Uh, that is a direct violation of what limited guidelines they have. It's clearly a health issue for the children. The administration does have a responsibility for dealing with that. They are the ones who are exposing the children by allowing a sick teacher to come in and be in the classroom. In any workplace, if somebody is coughing and sick, they should be required to leave immediately. And they should not be allowed back in until they've had 2 successive negative 24-hour separated COVID tests. This is ridiculous. Uh, I mean, it's beyond the pale, actually, because it is everything that is wrong with their limited guidance. I read through their guidance this afternoon. It talks a real good story, but it has nothing about enforcement. It has nothing about ensuring that the guidance is actually followed. We know from the ventilation report that came out of the paper a couple weeks ago, and they've only tested, I think, a fraction of the classrooms, that a substantial number of the classrooms have serious ventilation problems and very poor air turnover. I simply do not see the schools as a safe environment for children at this point. Their own guidelines state that masking should be strongly recommended in cases where you were at medium or low or high transmission on the community levels, which are the CDC joke of a measure. And with the exception of the Big Island, which I believe they are currently classifying as low, Honolulu and Maui are at high, and Kauai is listed as at medium. So even under their own guidelines, they should be strongly recommending masking. And yet what both of those reports say is none of the kids are being encouraged to mask, none of the kids are masking. And so fundamentally, yeah, we've got unmitigated COVID spread probably occurring in classrooms right now.
Brian, real quick, I did not say that he tested negative. What the school said is they didn't have a positive test confirmation, whatever that means.
He's got symptoms. Symptoms under
yeah.
their guidelines are a reason not to be in the school.
Yeah,
It doesn't require a confirmed positive test. Symptoms alone are enough for somebody to be sent home.
I feel for the mom who went to the DOE, said, we cannot confront the teacher. Went to the DOH, they tell her, sorry, you got to go to the DOE because they have their own guidelines. What is one to do?
This is classic this is classic avoidance of responsibility. DOE has the responsibility to keep those classrooms safe. DOH has the responsibility to make sure that DOE is keeping those classrooms safe.
Well, I would contact
the stories
an attorney.
You have just told me are simply beyond the pale.
Yeah,
they're not
acceptable.
acceptable.
I agree. And these come from two very, very reputable people, very responsible people, very knowledgeable people about COVID. And I'm hoping that this mom is going to contact an attorney, and that is absolutely ridiculous. Dr. Lee?
Boy, well, I mean, it leaves me without words. I mean, it shows that the system is not working as it says it should be. And so what do you do when that happens? Well, what it means is people have to do extra work. So when things are not working as they should, that means people have to intervene, all right? So parents and students have to intervene in the situation. And I that sounds to me that's exactly what both those parents did in both those circumstances. And so I think it's something that it has to happen on a mass basis. So something I learned about bureaucrats is basically they're there to solve problems, okay? And basically, if something isn't a problem, they're not going to pay attention to it. And so in that case, the intervention has to become their problem, in that it's something they have to deal with. So letters from parents, calls, the whole gamut of things that you can do to try to get a situation under control. So the paramount fact about the schools is that it's compulsory, that children are compelled to go to be in education. So they either have to attend the school or have some kind of a homeschooling option. And if you're compelling people to go to a situation that's dangerous for the whole family's health, and one of the things that you see in COVID minimizers is they say the risk of children getting seriously ill is small, but that completely ignores the fact that kids transmit quite effectively, and the risk doesn't stop with the child, it goes to the whole connected family. And so really the family has to say, are being compelled to put our child into this situation is putting us all at risk, and we don't accept it. And um, I would say then look through all the possible channels of intervention in the situation. But the important thing is if the mass of the population goes along with this situation, then it'll persist. There has to be really widespread resistance and non-acceptance and not cooperating with the situation. Otherwise, it won't rise to the attention that it needs to get solved.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I wouldn't even send my kid to school, even if my kid wore a mask or not. If teachers are coming in sick and the school is allowing it and the DOE doesn't do anything, DOH doesn't do anything, I wouldn't send my kid to school. I'd get an attorney, and I would also go to the media. I suggested that this mom contact the media, all of the media outlets, and let them know, because it's insane that they would hear this story. I mean, when a child is texting their mom that they're not comfortable and they're afraid in a classroom with a teacher who's coughing uncontrollably, and the DOE can say, "Oh well, we cannot confront the teacher." Yeah, I think it's time to go to the media. I mean, it's so obscene. I think you said it. There are no words, really. There are no words, and I think they're living this facade that COVID is done, and that's what the message that they're trying to get across.
Well, I think the real problem, Mel, is that it is a facade. It's supported even by CDC at this point. I mean, their latest guidance is an absurd joke. We know that the median time for COVID or an Omicron infection is on the order of 8 days. That's median. That means that 50% of the people basically are no longer transmitting after 8 days, but 50% still are after those 8 days. We have numerous cases where we've seen people who have tested positive on rapid test out to days 15, 16, some people as long as 3 weeks. And yet we are telling people, oh, don't worry. After 5 days, even if you have symptoms or whatever, you can still go back into the classroom. As long as your fever is resolving and your symptoms are getting better, feel free to go right back into the classroom. We don't require any masking there when we know that, especially with Omicron, a huge proportion of the transmission is asymptomatic. Okay, there's actually a study that just came out today in JAMA Network Open that basically looked at, it was a study of healthcare workers who were actually monitored very closely, took interviews and so on at regular intervals. 56% of those who tested seropositive for an Omicron variant never were aware that they were ever infected. 90% had no symptoms. 10% reported they had some mild symptoms, but they thought it was something else like a common cold or something. And so, at least half of the cases out there are probably completely asymptomatic. Yet without any testing or anything of this sort, we're saying, yeah, after 5 days, just come back to the classroom. Now we say, yes, wear a mask, but we just pointed out nobody's wearing a mask. I mean, how many of these kids who are coming back in the classroom are following that guidance about wearing a mask for, at least out until day 10? And even until day 10 is way too short because many people are still infectious beyond day 10 even. So I think, it's just this whole guidance, like you say, it's a facade. It's basically to act like we actually have some standards in place when in reality we have no standards. The standards are just go and spread the virus around. Nobody particularly cares anymore.
Well, I keep in mind now the quarantine requirements have been lifted, so you don't even have to wait 5 days after exposure. You in fact, you're required now to go back to class.
No, but there are still 5-day isolation requirements for anybody who tests positive or has symptoms.
Yeah, if you test positive, but on the exposure.
Or even if you have symptoms, there is still a 5-day isolation requirement.
Yeah.
But obviously that teacher is not following that.
I mean, you're sick, you stay home. My gosh.
Exactly. You stay home and you should be isolating for 5 days. I'm actually looking at their isolation protocol for K-12 school settings right now, which was revised as of August 15th. So that was revised Monday. Students and staff who Students and staff who test positive for COVID-19 or who have COVID-19 symptoms should isolate for 5 days regardless of vaccination status. That is the actual guidance that is in effect right now. That teacher is clearly in violation of that guidance. And the schools have a responsibility to enforce that guidance, as minimal as that guidance is.
Yeah. Well, Janelle says, "Stay home and get fired." Janelle, you know that won't happen. If you're sick and you stay home, you won't get fired. And if you get fired, uh, yeah, your compensation will be much more than what the DOE pays you. I mean, it's just about responsibility and respect of the people that you work with and the students that you teach. That's what bugs me about this whole thing. I understand the loyalty to the school and to education to the kids, but that's stupid when you go to school sick. Yeah, and even let's say it's not COVID, it's the flu. You want to give your kids the flu? You want to give the kids the flu so they can go home and give it to their loved ones? Or it's disrespectful, it's irresponsible, and for the school to come out and just clearly say we cannot confront the teacher. I think I think it's gross negligence, and I think
Well,
someone has a
Mel,
legal claim.
it is gross negligence. It's unfortunately the way this country is dealing with this thing now, which is the same as the way the UK is dealing with it right now, acting like it's not there. And that is the reason in the UK, recently, they had 20% of all children out of school sick on a given day. Because that's how much COVID was being spread in the schools in the UK. They have exactly the same complete lack of, I'm sorry, yeah, there's stuff on paper about restrictions here, but you just said nobody's masking. They're not following the ventilation guidelines. People are coming into school sick and nobody's doing anything about it. So you have no guidance in place effectively. That's what's happening in practice. And so, yeah, we're just like the UK now. They have exactly the same setting. We know the vaccination rates are phenomenally low, especially once you get below high school. High school, yeah, they're up in, I think, 75% range. But you get below that, I think we're at 20% or something in the younger kids. So, we've got very low vaccination rates. We've got no masking going on in the schools. We've got sick people coming into the classroom and not being sent home. Yeah, we've got a problem. And we are going to see high absentee rates as a result of that.
Yeah, on both students and teachers.
Exactly.
And that creates a bigger problem because when a teacher gets sick, if they don't have the facilities or the resources, what they do is they double up the kids in a classroom, which just creates even a much more healthy environment for spread. It's crazy. It's crazy. What are the numbers came out today? We're going down, guys. The numbers are going down. The media was celebrating tonight. The state's all happy because it's down to only 404 cases a day documented. Dr. Lee, what were your thoughts when you saw the numbers? Again, 13 more deaths in the last week, which again, may be acceptable to some. It's sure as heck not acceptable to me. What are your thoughts there?
Well, I mean, it looks like the BA5 surge has peaked, and it didn't give much more than a bump, and that's good news. So, what does that mean? It meant that it didn't have that high reproduction number above what the BA2 and its family had. But the bad news is that we are still at extremely high levels of cases. In fact, we're higher than our case numbers. Average case numbers for the past week were higher than 74% of the case numbers for the entire pandemic. All right, so we're in the upper quartile, and 3/4 of the days of the whole pandemic, we've had fewer cases than the average of the past week. So, we're just swimming in COVID, and I can show slides if you want.
Sure.
Want to see them? Let's see. Let me turn them on. Dr. Brown, do you have anything to add to that?
I just got one slide I can show that illustrates what you just said. You want me to put that up real quick?
Sure.
Okay, Mel, let me share this. Let's see. Find the right one. There we go. Yeah, you want to put that up, Mel? This is showing exactly what Dr. Altenberg was just talking about. This is a fit that did basically to the trends in BA2 and BA4/5. The upper red line that you're seeing here with the green dots around it is the actual overall case numbers. So you can see, yes, they are coming down on a fairly steady trajectory that'll probably take us to about 100 infections, 100 cases per day by the end of this month. The orange line here is the BA5 epidemic, which, like Dr. Altenberg just said, for us appears to have peaked comparatively low. Although with that said, it's very shallow. It came up slowly and it's going to drop slowly. So this is going to be with us for a while. And then the blue line is BA2, which has pretty much disappeared now. That's more or less gone, forced out by BA4 and BA5. So yeah, we are on a nice downward trajectory right now. Hopefully we stay on that trajectory. And we probably will until the next variant comes in. So I'll turn it back over to Dr. Altenberg now.
Yeah, thank you. That's really helpful. It's helpful to see the, see under the hood of what those numbers are by comparing the two variants. Let me share my slides here. Okay. Tell me when you see them.
Here you go.
Okay. So here's the case numbers for the entire pandemic. And here we are at the end of this curve here. This orange line, this is the maximum case numbers for the past week and drawn for comparison over the whole pandemic. And you can see the only times that we exceeded these were during the Delta wave and the BA1 wave. And 74% of these days had fewer case numbers than we've got right now. And if you actually, well, I haven't talked about the deaths which you brought up. If you look at the average deaths per week for each year of the pandemic, Hawaii averaged 9.6 deaths per week for 2020. All right, the one that first hit. In 2021, the year of the vaccines, Hawaii had 14.5 deaths per week on average. And this year, so far, Hawaii has 14.9 deaths per week. So it's actually worse in terms of deaths than this year than it was last year. Now let's hope that the recent drop in death rates will make this year better than last year, but they haven't yet. Anyway, this is where we are, and you can see at the end of the mask mandate, it didn't improve the situation. Here's the Kinza e-thermometers reading. So this has come way down from what it was a few weeks ago, and where it was up in the 80s and 90s. Now we're at this 58. So I'm not sure. I don't know what their scale is, but their assessment of it is we're in high risk, and they say take precautions now. So this is for all of Hawaii. It says higher risk groups should protect themselves by avoiding all social contact. All groups should limit social contact and practice everyday preventative actions. Here's the Walgreens variant tracking for Hawaii. And this, you can see we're about 100% in this red zone here, which is the BA4 and BA5, because BA1 is long gone. But this they can tell by the S gene dropout phenomenon. So we're all BA4 and 5 right now, and it's the same for the whole country. And now here, this is how I like to take a sort of an X-ray view at what's going on with the numbers, which is to take each day's numbers and divide them by the previous week, 7 days before, and that takes care of the day of the week fluctuations. And so when it's in the original BA1 surge, boy, on Oahu, which is this orange line, it was one day was 4 times as many cases as 7 days before. All right, that's what this means. And when cases were dropping very fast, well, it looks like one day you only had 60% of the cases of the previous 7 days. So here, this was our BA1 wave. This is our BA2 wave. And this is when cases started to grow under BA5. But now you can see at the tail end, all the counties have drifted under the line 1, which says that the cases are going down, but not by a big ratio week to week. So the drop in case numbers is exceedingly slow. I mean, this whole thing looks pretty flat. And that means at these high case numbers, we're going to have them for a while, unless this curve should radically change, but it doesn't really. I mean, you can see there's a regularity in these week-to-week ratios. Now, here's something that George White pointed out on Twitter, which is if you look at the map of positivities and you go on to the Schofield zone, they're getting 65% positivity rate, which is really extraordinary, much higher than the rest of the state. And there was a speculation that it might have been due to the rim pack exercises. I don't know if anybody can address that, but this is really an extraordinary thing. Lastly, I got on my Facebook feed, I got this Department of Health flyer, and it was asking about should I take a second test if I've been positive before coming out of isolation. It says no, you do not need to take a second test after you test positive because of the likelihood that you could continue to test positive even when you are no longer infectious. So this is misinformation. If they're talking about home tests, which I assume they are, it's true that PCR tests will test positive, can test positive long after, because they're so extraordinarily sensitive, and they could be picking up just bits and pieces of the viral genome that are still left in the nasal area. But the home tests, if you get a home test that's positive, that means with almost complete certainty you are infectious and you can infect somebody else. So a negative home test doesn't tell you that you're not infected. It tells you that at least at that moment, if you did the test well and got a good sample, that you're probably not contagious. But a positive test, it pretty much assures you that you are contagious at that moment. And so this is, if they're trying to give people advice about home tests, this is misinformation. Anyway, then they go on to the rest of their recommendations, but they notice that when they say you can end isolation after all of these following is true, it's been 5 full days since your symptoms started, you had no fever for 24 hours, and your symptoms are improving. This omits the crucial component of the CDC's 5-day isolation recommendation, which is that you have to continue to mask for 5 days after isolation. So here the whole masking part is dropped off of this information piece. And so this, and unfortunately, this is the take-home message that people are getting, which is, okay, I isolate 5 days and then I can go out and be normal again. And the masking recommendation gets deleted. So this is the problem of when you make recommendations and you don't market test them to see how they actually work in practice. So that's the slides I have to show for now. I'll give it back to you.
Yeah, and I think the disclaimer is that all the numbers on your charts, Doc, are based on the numbers that are being collected by the official collection sites. The clinics or the testing sites or the labs, and not counting the home tests. The other thing that I'm concerned about is the Schofield area. There were several zip codes in the military arena that had very high positivity rates. And correct me if I'm wrong, but last time I heard from the state is the military test results weren't being counted in with the state's numbers. And if anyone can correct me if I'm wrong, that's just what I was told. It was a while ago that the military numbers were not being added into the state's counts. But again, that could be wrong today. I know at one time that was the fact. I would find it very hard to believe that if we had included 65% positivity rates from 3 or 4 zip codes, that we would have a 10% positivity rate overall. I mean, I think that'd be very difficult. You'd have to have a lot of negative tests to come out with a 10% average if you have 85, 70, 65% positivity rates. So I'm hoping someone can correct me. That is correct as far as I know, which is why the state reported cases means is community testing beyond military. Yeah. Thanks, George. So, Dr. Brown, what are your takeaways from today's report?
I think fundamentally we're in a decline. Hopefully that will sustain for the next several weeks, but like Dr. Altenberg pointed out, it's a slow decline. My guess as to what's actually going on is that what we're doing is we're really exhausting the supply of susceptibles, that is, people who are still subject to an infection because they're not taking precautions and they haven't had a recent infection or a recent boost. But that occurs at a relatively slow rate because there is a lot of protection right now in the community from our previous BA2 wave, which was pretty serious. That was a pretty large one. And the BA1 wave before that, which was even larger, although BA1 was far enough back that we're probably not seeing as much protection from that. There's a study in Qatar that did show that a recent BA2 infection was about 80% protective against a BA4, BA5 infection. So my guess is that all those people who got infected basically between April and June, largely with BA2, probably have some pretty good protection against getting reinfected right now. Now that will wane over time, probably after 3-4 months, that will start to decrease pretty substantially, especially when the next variant comes along with more immune escape. But because of that, the percentage of people in the population who are still left to be infected is getting comparatively low. It's certainly not happening because of anything that we're doing in terms of actual prevention. Like people pointed out in the comments quite often, nobody's masking anymore. People are acting like there's no virus out there in the community, even though it's spreading like crazy. We've still got large numbers of healthcare workers out on a regular basis, so we're bringing in more from the mainland. The government finally did declare the emergency on that in the last week so that they can bring in more healthcare workers from the mainland. And so we're going to be kind of in this slow, steady decline probably for the next, 3 to 4 weeks. Then after that, what happens is anybody's guess. I think it's really going to depend on what happens with the next variant in the chute. Right now, we don't know what that variant will be. But what we do know about this particular brand of COVID is that it's working pretty hard to get around immune responses. And that is, it works hard to get around immune responses both from vaccines, and it also gets around immune responses from recent infections with other variants. And basically, the next variant that will probably start to take hold will be one that can work around a recent BA5 infection or around people who haven't gotten boosted in a long time. We've still got a substantial number of our percentage of our population that hasn't been boosted. Many people got their second shot with no booster after that over a year ago at this point. Okay, so those people have probably very, very little, if any, protection left against Omicron at this point in time. So they're very susceptible to infection unless they've been infected recently. So really, and all those protections will wane over time, both the vaccine protections, because we're not really boosting many people at all right now, and the previous infection protections are also declining over time. So more and more people are going to become susceptible as we move further out from the current wave. And then a new variant will probably come in that has more immune escape, especially against those protections. And then we'll go through this whole game again. The problem is we're just going to repeat this cycle, I think, until we actually start to get sensible about actually taking some protective measures when community transmission levels are high, and they are very high right now still. If you actually look at the CDC community transmission map, not the so-called community levels map, which is kind of a joke. You want to put this up, Mel?
Sure.
This is the CDC community transmission map, which shows you where there is high risk for transmission in the community. And as you can see, 93% of the country is high. All of Hawaii is high in terms of transmission, except I think Niihau's not quite red. But beyond that, the entire rest of the state is high transmission. So, there is still a lot of risk. There is still a lot of transmission going on in the community. It's coming down slowly, like I say, because we're exhausting the pool of people who can still get infected. But, we're open for this to happen again, probably a month or two out. And then the real question is going to be whether when the new boosters come out in the fall, if people actually take them or not. And, certainly in terms of the uptake of the current boosters, it hasn't been that great. So I think we've really got to be concerned about what's going to happen in the fall if people really aren't boosting. So, right now the situation looks good. Hopefully for the next month or so, we'll still see these declining numbers, and hopefully they'll stay low for a month or two after that. But at some point, there is going to be another variant. Or I should say probably a new version of Omicron that has more immune escape. I mean, there's a couple that are floating around right now. BA 4.6 is in the United States and is now about 5.1%, I think, of all cases in the United States. There's one coming out of India, BA 2.75, which does seem to have some immune escape against BA 5, and does seem to be outcompeting BA 4 in Australia right now, which is the only place we've got kind of good data on there. And their BA 2.75 is coming up much more rapidly. Again, let me pull up a graph here. So you want to put this up. Yeah. So this is the blue here is the BA 4.6, which is the one that's at about 5% in the US right now. And the purple one is BA 2.75 that got in more recently. And you can see that it's actually spreading much more rapidly than the BA 4.6. So that may be the next one that we need to be concerned about. It's currently very high in India. It's very high in Nepal. It's very high in Australia. It's about half the cases in Japan. So that's the one I think to watch right now in terms of what may come here next. And when that comes is, again, anybody's guess. It could be a couple of months. It could be faster than that. We just don't know right now. But that's kind of what's on the radar right now, I think, in terms of what people are focusing on. But then there might be something new that comes up that we haven't seen yet. So,
yeah, this thing is ever evolving. There was a question about boosters. I kind of gave up following the timetable. Is the third booster available for people that already had their second booster? Does anyone
No, not in general, no. Right now, they still have, a third booster is available pretty much for everybody, or I should say, third shot, first booster is available for everybody, but only a fraction of people have actually taken that up. The second booster, so the fourth shot, is available to anybody 50 and older, or to people below that age with high risk, which they're actually defining in terms of immune compromise. So you got to have a pretty seriously compromised immune system, basically, be eligible under that. And then, immunocompromised people can get a fifth shot. So, and should have, hopefully have gotten that fifth shot already. So, that's where it stands. But no, there's no new availability of an additional booster for people under age 50 right now. They get their third shot and that's it. So I think that will probably change when and if they come out with the next version of the vaccine, which will probably be bivalent. What they're planning in the U.S. is something that has a mix of the previous wild type sort, the original Wuhan type strains, and then probably some BA.5 in the United States. That's what they're planning. Now, the time frame for that is completely unclear. The UK is actually looking in early September at a bivalent vaccine that includes BA.1 along with some original wild type. And that's due to be explored, I think, the first week in September. Their vaccine committee is basically looking at that to make some decisions about that. The Germans, I think, are looking at one that actually may have some BA.5 in it toward the end of September. But the availability of those in the U.S. is unclear at this point because those European countries placed their orders for these much earlier. And while both Pfizer and Moderna are working on these new bivalent vaccines, if you're not in the pipeline for them, your delivery is going to be delayed. So, I've heard people in the administration talk about maybe in September we might start rolling them out, but I suspect the availability will be comparatively low. And even in the UK, they're saying with the bivalent, they will only have enough for like half of the people who need it by the end of the year. So, there's probably going to be some pretty severe restrictions in terms of age and, serious risk for COVID in terms of when people can get the bivalent vaccines going forward. So I think that, if you haven't gotten your booster, I would go ahead and get a booster right now because, we're coming into the fall. There's going to be something else coming into the pipeline. And unless you're in the older age categories or in the severely immunocompromised category, you're probably not going to be eligible for that new booster for at least 3 to 4 months. And so you might as well go ahead and get the current booster, which will still help you. It extends your protections for a couple of months after you're boosted. So there is still a lot of value in the original wild type sort of vaccines. They still work very, very well in the short period, in the 2 months to 3 months after you get boosted. So for people who are worried about infection, who plan to be traveling soon or so on, if you get that booster, you might as well get it now.
Real quick, George just posted the most recent variant report shows that there are 25 cases of the 4.6 already here in Hawaii. So it's already here, and we just got to be aware that it's just one of several variants that are floating around the world right now.
Yeah, 4.6 so far doesn't seem to be growing very rapidly here in the U.S. I mean, it was 4.6%, I think, last week. It's like 5.1% this week. BA.5 is still kind of holding the lead pretty strongly in the United States. And, BA 4.6 is just kind of playing around the fringes right now. So I'm not too worried about 4.6 right now. I'd be much more worried about 2.75 if that gets in. Although, fortunately, the good news out of India on 2.75, it does not appear to be causing a lot more serious hospitalization. It seems actually to be a little less pathogenic than BA.5. So, in the test tube, at least, when they look at cell cultures. So, it again, while it may have a transmission advantage, it probably will not have a whole lot of additional severity associated with it relative to what we've seen with BA.5. But that doesn't mean it's a good thing, because if a lot of people get infected, we still end up with a lot of people in the hospital. We still end up with a lot of people dying, just like we're seeing right now with BA5.
Dr. Lee?
Well, one thing about the bigger picture of the evolution of these variants is the question about could we get another blue sky variant, out of the blue, like Omicron, like we got in November. And so, I mean, the good news is that it's been 9 months since any blue sky variants have appeared, and so that gives us some measure of how likely it is, how frequently these can arise that are radically different from the prior variants. And so all the variant hustles that we've been getting since Omicron have been all within that Omicron family, the BA1 through 5 and the sub variants, which shows that once this blue sky variant emerged, that it had a lot of evolutionary potential, and that's why it's continued to dominate. The previous sequence of variants, they were not descended from each other. So alpha didn't have any connection with delta or beta or gamma. They were all sort of different, independently derived lineages. But now this Omicron family, they're all related, although there's still a lot of diversity within them. But they've all come out of that one source, and we haven't seen any other new completely out of the blue variants come in since then. And that I think is good news, but it's not. It's no guarantee, because it's only been 9 months, and so we don't know what may be brewing out there, and may yet come into the population. So I mean, the hope is that the variants run out of evolutionary innovation, and so every time the variant goes through a population, it's setting up immunity against its own particular amino acid sequence. And it's very easy for it to change amino acid sequence, but the hard part is to maintain its infectivity and its functionality when you change sequence. So what it may be running out of is novel ways to code itself that still bring about its ability to infect people. And so that's the hope in terms of running out of evolutionary potential, and where that we may finally get to what's called endemic, where we're not getting radical surprises from 1 month to the next. But there's no demonstration that we're there yet. So that's hopium if you build any kind of policy around it. So that would be my larger kind of big picture view of the evolution of the virus so far.
Yeah, I think my concern in that regard is, I agree with your take on that. The problem is, I think there's still a lot of evolutionary room for Omicron to continue its immune escape. And it also has actually proven pretty good at continuing to up its game in terms of transmissibility, although that's intimately tied to the immune escape, so we can't really separate the two very well. But I'm not seeing that much evidence that it's really started to run out there. And part of the reason for that is because we just let this thing spread like crazy around the world. We've done virtually nothing to attempt to slow its spread. Most places have now abandoned masks. They've abandoned all the precautions, just like our schools. And so we basically are giving this thing unlimited purchase, basically to infect hundreds of millions, if not billions of people. And that just gives it lots of little laboratories in which to try out new variations, new approaches, new mutations that basically give it more evolutionary room. And so the real problem I've got is I'm not clear what the time frames on which we will equilibrate with this virus relative to our immune systems. Those timeframes could easily be 10, 15 years rather than 1 or 2 years. And we just don't know at this point. And that would mean then we might be condemned to going through this cycle of kind of repeated infections, probably lowering mortality over time. But with that said, we haven't mentioned the other elephant in the room, which is long COVID, which affects a lot of people and leaves a lot of people sick for a long period of time. So, if we look at the timing of these cycles, in the first couple of years of this epidemic, we were looking at 6-month cycles. It was about every 6 months that we would see a new variant come in and take over the world. Starting from the original Wuhan, then D614G, then Alpha, then Delta. Now those time frames, if you actually look at Europe, are down to about 3-month cycles, where we're seeing, the BA1 variant, the BA2 variant, the BA5 wave. So we're seeing these large waves, one after the other, at about 3-month intervals right now. And my worry is that that's probably going to continue for at least a couple more cycles, and maybe longer than that, depending how long it takes for our immune system to eventually, come to terms with this. And we've got enough infection and enough protection in the population that it does reduce in severity low enough that we don't have to worry about it. But if we continue to just allow this thing to spread, we're going to keep giving it room to evolve. And that's really what I worry about. And I like I say, I'm not seeing evidence that we're running out of evolutionary room for COVID right now. This thing has done an incredible job of evolving over the last 2.5 years.
Well, I can remember early on, all the experts, the two of you included, but all the other, Jerome came, all the rest of the people that either were on our show or were speaking on the news channels, that the way we were going to get rid of COVID, the quickest way was to stop providing a breeding ground for this virus to spread. And I'm just wondering, had we kept some of these safety measures in place a little while longer, would that have impacted the number of cases? Could we have seen by now actually very low numbers if we had just stuck to the plan a little while longer rather than open everything up? We know the opening up spiked everything. And I'm not talking about lockdowns. I'm just talking about the simple masking requirements and the social distancing requirements. Had we been a little bit more patient, would we be, on the lower range of cases today?
Well, I think, that's the whole problem. The whole dialogue has been reduced to it's either lockdown or it's nothing. And everybody leaves out all of the intelligent things we could be doing in between, including masking, including improving ventilation. We've got, there's 5 pages of guidance on ventilation in the DOE guidelines. But as far as I can tell, virtually none of it has been paid attention to. They talk about CO2 monitors, but then, like your story at the start is, nobody's actually using them. And when they're using them, they can't even keep it below 1,200 when they should be keeping it down around 600 to 800 if they have appropriate rates of air exchange and so on. So, clearly we're sending the kids into a risky situation there. We're not doing what we should be doing to improve that ventilation. We're not using HEPA filters the way we should be using them. Every classroom should have a HEPA filter or a Corsi Rosenthal box, which you make by taking a big fan and you put 4 air conditioning filters in a box in a cube around it. And those are incredibly good at cleaning the air. I mean, they suck out all the garbage. Everything is going through those 4 filters. And so it can actually give you very high, removal rates for virus in the air.
Speaking of which,
yeah, a fan like
I
that.
happen to have this handy here.
Yeah,
So
okay. Yeah,
so
there we go. There's one.
This costs $50 to make. It has a nice little Black & Decker 10-inch fan and then 12-inch filter. So I made a cube out of 5 of them, and this thing is pretty quiet. I don't know. Can you hear it? Can you hear the noise?
Not really.
Good.
No.
Anyway, so it's very quiet. And so these are MERV 13 filters, and 12 by 12 by 1. And very simple to build. And these things, they even though the filter is nothing like a HEPA filter, so which gets like 99% removal of any virus particles in the air, this only has like about 65% removal. So the whole key of it is that the air goes through multiple times. So the first time it goes through, there's 35% left of the virus. The second time it goes through, there's only 10%. The third time there's 3%. The fourth time there's only 1%, and so you're up to 99%. So the whole key to this is the high throughput of air through it, that you just sit in a room and it just keeps sucking the air again and again and cleaning it out.
Well, the state don't have any money. I mean, they gonna expand the stadium for 30 million. They're gonna build a new stadium for 350 million. I don't think they can afford any kind of safety equipment for our kids
Well,
in school.
not to mention, there's several hundred million in CARES money that somebody is still sitting on somewhere in this state.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
this is the whole problem I've got. My understanding is there's at least 300 million of CARES money that's still left, and they're planning to divert it into other things. And yet, we still have a serious COVID problem that we're not dealing with at all. And we're just trying to act like it's going away. We're trying to treat it like we treat all other diseases. And yet this one is far more infectious than any other disease that we're dealing with right now. So, it's just insane.
The distressing thing I heard this week was a statement from Dr. Ashish Jha, who's the President Biden's COVID coordinator, to the American Chamber of Commerce, that says that they're heavily discussing how to get the federal government out of pandemic management and turn it over to commerce. All right, as soon as they can. They say they want to make it a very smooth transition, but they want us to get out of emergency mode and just have it be treated as part of commerce. Well, if you look at how American commerce sizes up against the rest of the industrialized world in terms of producing good health outcomes for a certain amount of money, you'll see that it's a miserable failure. We pay more for healthcare and get less in terms of health outcomes than any of the European countries, than the European countries as a whole. And that's now the goal that Dr. Jha has said is the where the federal government wants to go, to basically, I mean, the way they talk, it's as though COVID was a radioactive subject and a hot potato that they're just trying to get out of their hands and toss it to somebody else. And maybe that's true from the point of their pollers or their focus groups. But, if that to me is a really frightening prospect of that will get a complete incompetence if the federal government basically says, it's just normal. And, saying that they want to get out of emergency mode. Well, I think that's great, except, if you're a firefighter and you'd like to say, well, let's get out of emergency mode. Well, you do it by putting out the fire. Okay. And they have not put out the fire of COVID in this country. So, if you're going to declare an end to the emergency, it better be because the fire is out, not because you're tired or you're afraid you're not going to get reelected if you keep attending to the fire.
Well, and I think the follow-on to that was the headline I saw on CNN this morning that basically said the government is also planning to, in the coming year, no longer be supporting shots, no longer be supporting testing. So all of it will basically be turned over to, the tender mercies of our wonderful American healthcare system, which means that for anybody who's not rich in this country, you're probably going to have a hard time getting appropriate COVID care when you need it. You're going to be back at the tender mercies of your insurance companies and what they want to pay for and what they don't want to pay for. I'm sure the support for home testing will vanish almost overnight as soon as the government no longer is, saying that insurance companies have to pay for that. So, yeah, they're about to throw us back to the wolves of the private sector. And we know how well that has worked out. Like Dr. Altenberg pointed out, we've got the highest per capita expenses and the worst per capita outcomes in the entire OECD. So, turning it over to the private sector is no solution to anything.
Well, the good news is that Walensky said that she's going to overhaul the CDC because of the uh, COVID mistakes that were made. I don't know if you saw that story. It just came out today, I think.
Yes, it did.
And she's apologizing for the shortcomings, and she vows to uh, restructure the CDC. Uh, kind of late, sister. Kind of late.
Well, and I mean, whether they can even do it in a reasonable time frame and in a reasonable fashion is not clear to me at this point. To me, the most concerning part of that CNN story today was the line that said, along with communicating the CDC's health information, part of his job, and this is talking about the guy who's being brought in to improve their health communications, is to manage risk communication and reputational issues for the agency,
Yep.
according to the CDC website. Somebody who's working on reputational issues is a PR flack.
Hmm.
He's not a public health communications person. He's a PR flack. And that's not what we need. We actually need somebody who knows how to do public health communications at CDC. They have guidelines, they have manuals on how to do this, and they have not followed them at all through this entire pandemic, nor are they following them with monkeypox. We're repeating exactly the same mistakes with monkeypox that we did with COVID. Slow testing, inability to access vaccines, inability to access the treatments, inappropriate targeting, I mean, you name it. We're messing this one up the same way we did COVID.
I mean, I think the CDC definitely needs to be restructured. The problem is who's doing the restructuring, and is the process that produced the problems of the CDC just going to be the same problems, the same active, problem with the restructuring? So, the analogy I like to use is, suppose you have a computer program that has a bug in it. All right. No matter how many times you run the program, it's not going to get rid of the bug. It just repeats the bug. So, you have to go to a deeper level to fix the program and to get it to work again. Just running it won't fix the bug. And the question is this restructuring of the CDC just going to incorporate the same institutional pathologies that has led to its current set of problems? And I mean, it could make it even worse. So I don't know how. There has to be some kind of organized insight and pressure from the expert community, the epidemiology community of the nation. I think, to have input on this restructuring. Otherwise, I worry that it could make it even worse than it already is.
I agree with you. I think that, what's really needed is, I mean, the biggest problem we're facing here is that CDC has moved away from a public health orientation to an individualist orientation. That is, you're responsible for yourself and forget everybody else. That is not public health. That has never been public health. It never will be public health. It basically is a biomedical orientation that is related to the way medicine works, which is the doctor focuses on the individual patient. He does not focus on the population. And that approach cannot work when you're trying to do public health disease control. And I think, unless this restructuring basically draws upon an expert committee that is very heavily drawn from university-based public health people who actually have a population orientation, I agree. It could actually make it worse than it is right now, as if it's not bad enough to begin with.
Well, I think as long as the CDC, and we experience the same thing here in the state. As long as the Department of Health or the CDC is controlled by politics, by the White House or by the Capitol, As long as the state, the Department of Health and the CDC responds to commerce, to business, then their whole focus has detracted from public health and safety. We saw that time and time again. We saw it here in Hawaii. It was so obvious. We saw it at the CDC with the changes of requirements or safety protocols at the request of airlines or business. And we clearly saw that here in Hawaii. It was clear. And I promised myself I wouldn't bring up Josh Green's name again, but it was very clear that his attempt was to get this place open as soon as possible and ignore the risk to the health and safety of our people. And the governor held out for quite a while. I was very proud and impressed with Ige because he held out for quite a while. And then he finally gave in to the pressure and said, okay, fine, open them up, let them go, open up the schools. He held out the schools for quite a while. And, he succumbed to the pressure of the special interests. Same thing with the CDC, same thing with the White House. And until we have these organizations that are given the autonomy or the authority to implement and run the programs, it ain't going to change. Money always wins. And that is, unfortunately, the reality of the world we live in today. In many of the other countries, that's not the case. They'll shut down the country. They'll shut down the borders in a skinnet, and they don't care because their main concern is protecting their people. That just doesn't exist here in our country, definitely not here in our state. And that's a sad reality. And I hope I'm wrong.
Well, I would love to see a functional CDC again. But, if we have, any more wonderful guidance similar to the stuff that they're releasing this week, we're in big trouble. This week's guidance basically is pretty much a free-for-all. You've got your isolation at this 5-day thing, and then, just go back to work. Don't worry about it. No testing, because, we really don't want to test. And plus, we want to get out of the testing business come New Year anyway, so, we don't have to want to keep giving people these tests or something. So we don't want to get them expecting that those tests are going to be there. And yet, testing is the only way that people can safely return to work or return to school. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, but coming out of isolation should be a matter of 2 negative rapid tests separated by 24 hours. Mm-hmm. Unless you've got that, you have no business going back into a public space with other people because you're putting them at risk. And, and the type of guidance that you pointed to earlier from Department of Health that you don't need to test for like 90 days after is completely wrong. It is misinformation. And it feeds the confusion of people around testing. Rapid tests work. If you are still testing positive on a rapid test, you are infectious, period, end of story. That's the bottom line. Continue being positive for a time, but that's PCR testing. Most people aren't PCR testing anymore. It costs too much.
And the test out to get to work or school, we're not talking about PCR. We're talking about a home test.
Yeah.
I don't get it. Well, anyway, guys, we're in overtime. I do want to give the two of you an opportunity to share what's on your heart, on your head, in your brain for our viewers. Dr. Lee?
Boy, well, I don't like the direction that our national policy is going, but it's not just the U.S., it's all of the Western democracies basically going to a let it rip policy. I think, what my biggest fear, what I think is going to really get us out of this is going to be a new vaccine development that can give broad enough immunity that the variants can't out evolve it, okay, and that especially mucosal immunity that can prevent infection. And so my biggest fear is that these COVID minimizers are going to convince everybody so well that COVID is just a cold that it'll halt the development of new vaccines. I don't know if that's a well-grounded fear, but then I think we'll really be in a very tough situation for a long time. And again, the crucial thing is the biggest risk that every person has faced when they're getting infected with COVID from day one has been long COVID. All right, the most serious risk is clearly, requiring going to the ICU and dying. All right, but that's never been uh, the largest probability. The largest probability is getting long COVID, and so that's really like a second half of the disease. And if you think about other viruses, there are many other viruses where the acute infection is like completely asymptomatic or very mild. So HIV is a very mild acute infection, but it's the long corrosive effect of it on the immune system that is deadly. And we don't know what the long effects of COVID are because we've only had it for 2.5 years. Um, and long COVID sufferers, nobody knows how to cure them, and something like between 5 and 20% of every COVID infection has long-term symptoms that don't just go away, or that even crop up after they've gotten over the acute phase. And to me, this is the why you can't simply focus on death rates, and why I don't want to get COVID. Um, uh, and I think letting it rip like this is going to leave a lot of people with poor health, and that's why it's worth stopping the infections. Period. Um, so those are my main perspectives, but I'm not happy about this overwhelming consensus that has gripped our government leaders to just allow infection to rip through the population.
Dr. Tim?
Yeah, I'm going to agree very much with what Dr. Altenberg just said. I think that one of the greatest fears is that we slow the research train in terms of finding nasal vaccines, finding pan-coronavirus vaccines that will work across the entire range of SARS-CoV-viruses. There's a lot of research that's still needed going forward, basically to improve this situation. Did you lose me there, guys?
Oh, you froze up a little bit. You're okay now.
You're back now.
Oh, okay. Yeah, there's a lot of research that still needs to be ongoing, and the problem is if we turn away from doing that now, we're never going to do it. It's the same thing that happened with the original SARS vaccines, the original SARS back in 2003. We stopped that work. The money dried up for it. And if the same thing happens with these coronaviruses, we could be in real trouble because we have an opportunity here to come up with ways basically of dealing with the entire family if we continue this research and do it well. And we also need better monoclonal antibodies. I mean, there's actually a recent paper that came out on a new combination of 3 antibodies that will work across multiple types of coronaviruses. And that's very promising. But again, if that research basically dries up because there's no money to pay for it, or, no support for commercialization of these things, then we'll never get those. And we'll be left at the mercy of the viruses. And this is not the last virus. Monkeypox is the second major outbreak that we've seen inside 3 years. And there are others. Polio is basically spreading again. It's a vaccine-derived version of polio, but nonetheless, it can still cause crippling of individuals. And we're still seeing, we have a child who basically has been paralyzed by polio in New York right now. So, these are going to continue to happen. If we don't strengthen our health infrastructure, if we don't strengthen our research capabilities so that we're dealing with these things as they arise, then we're basically going to lose out to the viruses. That's the bottom line. They out-evolve us, and unless our science is keeping up with them, we're in big trouble. And the final thing I just want to leave people with is protect yourselves. Take every measure you can to protect yourself. Try to get the information you need. Make sure you've got access to vaccines and boosters. When you can get them, get them. Make sure you're masking when you're in crowds or in spaces where there's a risk of transmission, because you really do not want this. You do not want low COVID. You don't want any of this. And you certainly don't want to transmit it to your kapuna and to others in your network who are vulnerable, because they can still die of this despite all this talk about how, how much better we're dealing with it right now. 13 people died last week, 14 people the week before that, 23 people the week before that, 21 people the week before that. This is still with us. So take the steps to protect yourselves, and please be careful.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate you guys so much. I'm not sure if you can see the comments, but the viewers appreciate your sharing of your knowledge, your experiences. The one thing I'll say is that the state has decided to push the vaccines and boosters, but they're also not talking about long COVID. They're also not talking about the seriousness of this virus. So what's happening, and it's what I'm hearing from people, real people, is that they're not going to get the booster. They're not going to take any more boosters because they have been led to believe that it's not that bad, and because of that, people aren't getting protected. They're not wearing their masks. They're going back to parties. They're going out and hanging out with large groups because, again, the messaging is it's not that bad. I don't know how people can ignore the fact, and I know there's a lot of people out there, some that's on this show right now, that when they see the numbers, they focus on the case numbers and they're not focusing on the death. Tell me what other condition, situation, event that created 12 to 20 people a week dying, whether it's illness, whether it's a traffic, whether it's a restaurant that served bad food, or anything else that killed 12 people a week, 13, 14 people a week, 20 people a week. Would this state would be off their butts trying to prevent that. But for some reason with COVID, it's okay. It's okay. There is no attention raised to the number of people that are dying with COVID every single week. So it's unfortunate.
Well, the irony is that the Department of Health inspections of restaurants are going to keep looking for for workers washing their hands and looking for cockroaches or whatever. And we are not losing 20 people a week to cockroaches in restaurants. And meanwhile, they're not doing any inspections in terms of the ventilation of restaurants. Mm-hmm. So there's a real disconnect there, and where the regulations are not rational. All right, they're focusing on the manini and leaving out the big kahuna of the diseases.
And I think that's part of the problem, where when you talk about Ashish Jha was saying they want to turn it over to the private sector and basically let them deal with it. Well, even if you do that, the government could still play a very exemplary role by putting regulations in place, requiring a certain number of air changes per hour in every workplace, monitoring CO2 levels, and or even requiring establishments. Some countries do this. Belgium, I think, does this. Establishments are required to post what their CO2 level is. And if people see, oh, it's 1,200 in this place, I'm not going in there, then, that encourages them basically to go out and improve their ventilation. There are ways we can enforce these things. We can encourage them. Yeah, but they're going to come at some expense for the private sector. And, the private sector in this country has always found it cheaper to buy a few Congress critters than to actually do what's right by their customers and their employees. Congress critters are cheap.
Well said, man. Well said. The last thing that this state wants is for the national media to pick up on a COVID problem in Hawaii, because it's going to affect tourism. Unbelievable. The managed tourism that they supposedly are doing right now. Yeah, right. Yeah, right. Docs, thank you again. Viewers, villagers, appreciate you guys hanging in there tonight. We appreciate these two fine gentlemen. We'll get them on again in the next couple of weeks. We'll see how this thing turns out. But like Dr. Brown just said, man, take care of ourselves, take care of yourselves. Make sure you wear your mask. Make sure you be safe and share this information with everyone you know. All right, guys. We appreciate you guys. We love you guys.
Mahalo.
Take care. Stay
Thanks,
safe.
everyone. And
Aloha.
remember, it's your responsibility. Nobody else is going to do it for you.
Bingo. That's why you're the doc. Aloha, guys.
Okay. Aloha. See you.